What is good, Raider Nation? It's your boy Sanjit back at it with another live video. It's been a while. It's definitely been a really long time since I've been live. Today we got some. It's not technically news, but some. I guess it is kind of news if you think about it. First and foremost, I hope you guys can all hear me. And I want to give a shout out to all you guys that are already tuned in. A lot of comments have already been posted that I see here. So shout out to all of you guys. There may have been comments that I don't see right now on my StreamYard platform, which is what I use to go live. Shout out to all of you guys. I see a lot of you guys already here. A lot of you guys are already giving your thoughts and opinions. Shout out to you, old timer, member of the channel for a long time. Always shout out to you. You put it out there already, according to Tom Pelissero and Ian Rappaport. No deal has gotten done. Let me go ahead and just pull that report up really quickly. Here it is. You guys can see it on the screen. Ian Rappaport and Tom Pelissero said the following: the Raiders and star running back Josh Jacobs did not reach a deal per him and Tom Pelissero, despite the extensive negotiations. Now it's clear when he'll show up to play on the tag. I'm sorry. Now it's unclear when he'll show up to play on the tag. I think this is some interesting news here, right? If you guys really think about it with Josh Jacobs, he's one of those guys that had a lot of success for the Raiders this past season, but at the same time, he is also a running back. And I think people have to, you got to take both things into consideration, right? On one end, he's a great running back, but then on the other end, how much does he want? And I think that's part of what we don't really 100% know at the moment. We don't know if Josh Jacobs wants 12 million, if he wants 14, if he wants 16 million. We don't really know that. And I think that's the big thing that is kind of holding things back. Now, in Ian Rappaport's report, let me just pull it back up here. He does say that despite extensive negotiations, and that's kind of interesting because that means that the Raiders were at least talking to Josh Jacobs, right? They're at least considering possibly extending this guy, right? Now, I don't know if this is 100% fact. Not saying Ian Rappaport isn't a good reporter, but I don't know if this is 100% fact, right? Where Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler actually talking to Josh Jacobs. Adam Schefter put another report out there. It's kind of interesting, saying that Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs obviously did not sign the franchise tag tenders yet, so that they can basically skip training camp without getting fined because they're not under contract. So that's kind of an interesting report, right? Because Josh Jacobs may not be there now at camp. It's not 100% guaranteed if Josh Jacobs is skipping camp. We don't 100% know that, but it's likely that he is going to skip camp. It's likely that Josh Jacobs will not be there. In fact, we actually got another report coming out here that apparently Josh Jacobs is not following the Raiders on social media. So I don't know if this unfollowing just happened or if this has happened a while ago. A lot of guys do this. I never get it. I don't know why people take things to social media. It doesn't make a whole lot of sense for me, but I know some people like to do that. Before we continue talking about this, I just want to give a couple more shout outs to a couple more people. Shout out to NorCal Raider Jesse. He said, salute Sanjeev. Big shout out to you for being a member of the channel. Shout out to a couple more of you guys. Jacob, shout out to you. Said, if he is going to be unmotivated, they should trade him and get another running back. That's interesting because, is Josh Jacobs unmotivated? I don't know. Does he want to be a Raider? I would say yeah, right? But at what cost, right? Like, at what point is Josh Jacobs willing to say, hey, I'll take, X amount of money, right? Because I love being with the Raiders, right? Like, for example, let's say if Josh Jacobs puts a tweet out there that, hey, if the Raiders give me $12 million a year and they guarantee it for the next 3 years, I will love to be here, right? At that point, we know what Josh Jacobs wants, and it would be up to the Raiders to make that happen. And at $12 million, that's a deal for the Las Vegas Raiders, right? And I would say pay Josh Jacobs the $12 million. But unfortunately, we just don't know what it's going to cost, right? Shout out to you, Jacob, for the comment. Shout out to you, Top Beats. You also said the same thing that Mitchell Rentz tweeted. You said Jacobs just unfollowed the Raiders on Instagram and Twitter. So there you guys have it. It just happened. I don't know. It's interesting because unfollowing a team or following a team, we've seen players do it. Um, it doesn't mean a whole lot, right? It just means that something wasn't done, and in this instance, Josh Jacobs just didn't get that tag. Shout out to you. How about those Chiefs? Very, very solid Chiefs channel. But I know most of you guys here are not Chiefs fans, but shout out to you, a good friend of mine here. Big, big shout out to you, man. Big shout out to Juan. He says, so nothing happened. Shout out to you, Maui Mao, Raider Nation. Big, big shout out to you. Um, if you guys have questions, if you guys have comments that you guys want featured on the channel, I have so much stuff that's coming right here. Leave a super chat. I'll always get to super chats. We'll definitely try going through some of these comments. Some people are mentioning Sincere McCormick. We're definitely going to talk about him a little bit later on. Is Dalvin Cook an option? That's a very interesting question. I would say Dalvin Cook is definitely a option for the Raiders. Dalvin Cook is a really, really good running back, and Dalvin Cook probably just wants a 1-year contract, maybe 2 years at like $10 to $12 million. I think that's definitely an option for the Raiders, but that also means that you're moving on from Josh Jacobs, right? Because you're not going to pay Dalvin Cook and have that franchise tag actually get signed by Josh Jacobs. And I'm not sure exactly what it will take to trade Josh Jacobs, but to allow Josh Jacobs to walk, you just got to remove the franchise tag, which I think the Raiders can basically do at any point, right? To trade Josh Jacobs, you can't trade him until he signs the franchise tag. And I don't know if at that point you're liable to give him that money because the franchise tag is fully guaranteed, right? But Matt Miller, the tweet we have pulled up here, I want to talk about this a little bit. Matt Miller said the following. He said, he's been saying this for years. You draft the running back, you play that running back, and if he's good, you franchise tag that running back one time. And then you go back to step one and you draft the running back. Let's talk about this. Let's talk about this strategy right here because, when you look at certain teams that are having a lot of success right now, one of the interesting things with teams like the Chiefs, the Eagles kind of just did this as well, the Bills, is they're not paying their running backs. They're just letting these guys kind of walk, right? And I know the Bengals paid their running back a little while back, but they restructured that running back, and that running back took like $4 million less this season because that running back would have gotten cut, right? That's Joe Mixon. He would have likely gotten cut, or they would have moved on from him here really soon. But for him to continue staying with this roster, he's decided to take less money. He also understands the Bengals are going to look to replace him. In fact, the Bengals has drafted a running back in the 5th round this past season. They drafted a running back who's likely going to replace Mixon regardless over the next couple of seasons. And the thing with running backs is you can get a late round running back. We've seen Dameon Pierce go in the 4th round last year. He was a really, really good running back. Isaiah Pacheco of the Kansas City Chiefs went one pick after the Raiders took Britton Brown, and he had over, 1,200 yards last year. Running backs are replaceable, and Matt Miller, who works for ESPN, he's a draft analyst, is correct here, right? You don't pay running backs, especially not $16, $17 million. And I could see Josh Jacobs wanting to reset the market, especially since this past season, he was the best running back in terms of yards, right? Had over 1,600 yards last season. The number one running back last year in the NFL, right? Averaged 4.9 yards per attempt, and that's great. But at what point do you think about efficiency, right? At what point do you say, hey, we'd rather have Khalil Herbert, who we only have to give him 129 touches, and he'll get us 5.7 yards, right? Or DeAndre Swift, 5.5 yards, right? At what point do you consider efficiency over, the total number of attempts, right? Not saying Josh Jacobs wasn't efficient this past year. Obviously, 4.9 yards per attempt speak for themselves. But we've seen in the past he wasn't the most efficient, right? He averaged 3.9 yards per attempt in 2020, and he averaged, although this is 4.2, this does consider the playoff game in 2021. For the regular season, Josh Jacobs averaged like 3.9 yards, right? Or maybe it was 4 yards last season. So he hasn't been the most efficient in 2 of his 4 seasons. I don't know. I just think the Raiders really got to think about what you're going to do this season. There's some takes that I also want to look at. We'll look at those in a second. We got some comments that I want to get into. Um, NorCal Raider said, hit the like and subscribe button. Don't forget to smash the bell to get the notification. Big shout out to you, man. Make sure you guys do. We cover the Raiders year round. We pretty much make a video every single day, and we'll make a video even on the weekend, at least one video. I just did a Dylan Parham video yesterday. It was a film study. It only has like 3,000 views, right? And I know a lot of people don't see those videos. A lot of people don't even like watching film breakdowns, but we did a Dylan Parham video. Go check that one out. Phil Maddox says Britton Brown is up next. Let's go. That's going to be the interesting thing because there's 3 running backs right now. There's Zamir White, Britton Brown, Sincere McCormick. I think those are the 3 guys that one of those 3 will get the workload, right? Unless we go by a true running back by committee approach, what Josh McDaniels did do in the past with the New England Patriots. We'll see what ends up happening. I wouldn't be surprised if Brown is that next guy up. I don't think he was active at all last season during the regular season, but he did have a pretty good preseason. David says, do you think the O-line is the key to running back success? I do think that. I definitely think the offensive line is the key to running back success. You look at the Philadelphia Eagles. They have by far the best offensive line in the NFL. And you look at their running back situation, Miles Sanders was really good. I believe it was Kenneth, I forget his name, but there's number 2 running back. Really, really good in terms of yards per attempt. They're efficient running backs, right? And the thing is that offensive line's very, very good. You look at the San Francisco 49ers, their run scheme is really good. These guys get UDFAs and 7th-round picks, and they'll throw them in there, and they have success. Look at the Raiders. Look at Josh Jacobs, right? You could make the same argument that our offensive line is very, very good, especially for running backs, and it was a part of why Josh Jacobs did what Josh Jacobs did. In fact, Zamir White, I think, averaged like 4.1, 4.2 yards per attempt. So even Zamir White, in his own sense, was having success with the Raiders last year. In fact, there was actually one running play that Zamir White lost 7 yards on because Devontae Adams missed the block. But had he not missed that block, Zamir White would have averaged like 4.8 yards per attempt last year, right? That's on the offensive line and the run scheme, right? So, yes, I think the offensive line and run scheme factor into a running back having success. It is factually true. The Kansas City Chiefs running back, Isaiah Pacheco, is fast. I don't think he's a great running back by no means, but that offensive line's really, really good. Plus, you got all these weapons. Like Isaiah Pacheco's like the 5th option on that offense, and he had success because that offensive line and the run scheme was very, very solid, right? So to me, yes, O-line, offensive scheme definitely go a very, very long way. Noah said, can you do a follow-up video if we will have to go without Josh Jacobs and go with the running back by committee and showcase their abilities viewing their scout tape? Yes. I would definitely have thought about doing this. When I watch tape, and I'll give you guys an example, I did a Dylan Parham video where I dropped it yesterday. In that video, I looked at certain plays and I said Josh Jacobs just picked up 9 yards, and he picked up 9 yards basically being untouched. The first person that touched him was basically the guy that tackled him, right? And there are so many plays like that. In fact, if you guys look at, was it an 86-yard run that Josh Jacobs had against the Seattle Seahawks to end the game? If you guys look at that video, Josh Jacobs went untouched. Every player basically got blocked, and Josh Jacobs just ran straight. Now, he curved a little bit, but he basically ran straight. He went untouched. That play right there was because the blockers did a great job, right? So there are plays like that, right? And I think I'll definitely do some sort of video where you can watch the Raiders' offensive line, kind of how they block the scheme, how, Matt Collins went and picked off a safety. And because corners don't generally play the run, the corner was unaware, and because Matt Collins sold it a certain way, picked off the safety, a running back goes untouched for 25 yards, right? There's plays like that. And I'll definitely do a film breakdown to showcase that. On Six Soldier, shout out to you. Big shout out to you, man. I appreciate the first super chat of the day. You said, how many defensive tackles on the final 53? And thoughts on Silva, the rookie. I'll be the first to tell you guys, rookie with Silva specifically. I'll just be upfront and honest. I don't have a whole lot of tape of him. I think he's an interesting player based off of his highlights, which you can go to YouTube and watch highlights of any player. Highlights, he definitely looks interesting, but I don't have the actual tape, so it's hard to analyze like the hand-to-hand technique. It's hard to analyze when he lines up on the inside shade of a guard as opposed to the inside shade of a tackle versus over the center, and really analyze, right? Because with the highlights, you don't really have that angle, right? You don't have the end zone angle that you have with the tape. So I don't have enough footage of his to really analyze him. How many defense tackles on the final 53? It has to be at least 5, but I could see us getting up to 6. Probably be 5 though, to be honest. It'll probably keep a guy on the practice squad. Silva's probably an option as well. So I appreciate the super chat on 6 as always. Shout out to Kevin Lurker. I know I've gotten comments from some of you guys that, hey, like, you don't get the notifications when I go live, or some of you guys will comment after the live actually ends. And you guys will say that basically you missed the live. So shout out to you. I'm very, very happy that you're able to see the actual live video. Raider Geo makes a good point. He says Josh Jacobs' contract pays for 2 starters on defense. That is fact. Another thing his contract does is if you don't want to get 2 starters, you can get 1 superstar corner or 1 superstar safety or a superstar linebacker. Maybe not a corner. Corners may be going a little bit higher right now. But Jesse Bates got like $16 million, right? So you could have paid Jesse Bates with what you would likely pay Josh Jacobs. You could probably go out and get whoever the best linebacker is that's a free agent, right? And I'm not talking about Corey Littleton, right? Corey Littleton's not the best linebacker. I'm talking about like the Bobby Wagner in his prime, or the Roquan Smith in his prime, who the Bears just traded to the Ravens. Maybe Patrick Queen. I don't know how much upside Queen still kind of has. But yeah, that money could be used on other guys. So I think it's just interesting because, running back is that one position that it doesn't matter as much, right? Because running backs are replaceable. There's a lot of really good running backs. The reason why quarterbacks get paid $45 million per season on an AAV value is because because quarterbacks, there's not a whole lot of them out there, right? You get 1 quarterback in every other draft that's going to be like a top 7 quarterback. Running back wise, you get like 7 running backs every draft that come out, right? And some of these guys are going undrafted, right? So to me, it's just the value of the position. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Jeremiah Willis said the franchise tag will pay Josh Jacobs more than any amount he's earned per year. If he doesn't sign the contract, let him walk. Our offensive line and the blocking scheme are top tier. We can win with White. Fact, 100% fact. The good stuff says that Zamir White can give us 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns in this system easily, and I 100% agree with that. 100% agree with that, man. Zamir White can 100% give us 1,200 yards and 12 touchdowns in this system. Again, there's a difference between a guy having 330 carries versus 170 carries, right? Because the guy with the 170 carries could technically be more efficient, right? And I think the Raiders have to really figure out how to have a more efficient offense, right? Last year, Khalil Herbert averaged 5.7 yards per attempt. Khalil Herbert has always averaged a high, per yard attempt because he only gets like 12 touches a game, right? There's a big difference between a bell cow running back and a guy who can come in and have an explosive play, right? So the Raiders really got to figure out like that mixture of what it is, right? I think if you get, a guy like Josh Jacobs, who's really a bell cow, I don't know if you want to pay a guy like that, right? David asked a very, very interesting question. He says, Sanjit, do you have a cold, bro? I do have a cold. I am on the, on the later stage of that cold. I'm almost over it. I think tomorrow when I get up, I'll be over it. But I've been really, really sick this past weekend. Finally getting over it. I appreciate the comment. Old Timer said, I thought your Parham video was right on point, bro. Big shout out to you. I appreciate the comment. If you guys did not see my Dylan Parham video, go check it out. I posted it yesterday. Basically did like a breakdown of his rookie season. And it wasn't like the entire rookie season. I did like 7 selected Clips, run blocking specifically, that I thought were like, really represented Dylan Parham. And then we did some pass pro stuff, looked into some of his sacks. So shout out to you, man. I always appreciate that. Top Beat said, we may not always agree, Sanjit, but you're one of the best Raiders content creators on the planet. Just wanted to thank you for all your hard work you put into reporting on the Raiders, bro. Big shout out to you, man. I really appreciate that. These are the best comments to get as a content creator. There's a lot of good Raiders content creators. There's a lot of us that put the time and effort and energy into it. Every day I spend a long time creating content, right? Like some days I'll get up, get on the computer, 9 o'clock, I'll start looking at content. And it'll take me like 3 hours before I find the video that I want to create, And so shout out to you. I appreciate it, and I know other guys that create content as well that do a really, really good job. As long as you guys are here supporting, man, I know I'll always be creating content. I know some of the other guys will be as well. Shout out to you, man. I really appreciate the super chat. Raider defendant said, hey, bro, how do you feel about our wine back core? I feel like it's a weak spot. I'm not 100% sure what you're talking about. Linebacking core is, I think, what you meant. Yeah, okay. How do you feel about our line? I don't know how bad it's going to be. I think there's some unproven guys. Robert Spillane, I watched a film study on him recently from, I believe it was a Steelers fan. It may not have been. But the Steelers fan was very, very high on Robert Spillane. And it's kind of interesting because us Raider fans, we kind of write this guy off a little bit. We'll say, well, there's Divine Diablo. There's a couple of second year guys, right, that'll probably step up this year. The rookie out of Florida. And then we kind of put Robert Spillane to the side. But I think our linebacking group should be better. I think Divine Diablo is definitely going to take that step. Divine Diablo looked good to me last season before his injury. In fact, I think he was one of the league leaders in tackles at that point. And not just tackles, right? Like a guy picks up 7 yards, you wrap him up, but like actually good tackles for losses or tackles that went for like 1 or 2 yards. I think Divine Diablo's going to be much better this year. So I'm okay with the group right now. Obviously, it's unproven, and that's going to be the big thing. And the depth does worry me. All right, I'll be the first to tell you guys, but we'll see what ends up happening. I think there's still some good free agent linebackers. I believe Deion Jones, former Falcon linebacker, is still available. I should say former Brown because he was with the Browns last year. And I think Anthony Barr is still available as well. So we'll see what ends up happening there. Raider Jim says, Senji, how do you really feel about this? That's a good question. Because to be 100% honest, you guys, I think the Raiders should just move on from Josh Jacobs if he doesn't want to play under this 1-year contract. In fact, after the 1-year contract, I think the smart thing to do is to move on. But I will also state this, right? If the Raiders want to pay Josh Jacobs, and as long as Josh Jacobs is willing to get signed to like a $12 million contract, I'm okay with signing him as well. Right, but I don't think it makes sense to reset the market and say, let's pay Josh Jacobs $17 million. That doesn't make sense, right? If Josh Jacobs wants to be a Raider, I'm for it. Let's sign him. But the amount of money he gets paid has to be worth it, right? I'm not resetting the market for a running back, but I'll be willing to pay him $12 million. Now, the years also matter, right? Because I think the big part here is, if Josh Jacobs wants a 2-year, $30 million contract, I'll give that to him. I have no issue with that. But Josh doesn't want a 2-year contract. Josh is going to want a 4 to 5 year contract because he's going to want guaranteed money for a number of years, right? Because everybody understands the running back position doesn't last that long. So for the Raiders, they're going to want to pay Josh for 2 to 3 years and then move on. Josh is going to want a 4 to 5 year contract. So it really just depends on balancing that out. If it's a 2-year, $30 million contract, do it. If it's a 3-year, $36 million contract, do it. But if Josh Jacobs wants 4 years, $66 million, I'm not doing that. I'm not paying him $16.5 million. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel about the situation. And it's okay if you guys disagree with me. I don't think it's a big deal. I think we should all kind of have our own thoughts and opinions on this. As I've stated, I think certain running backs Not certain. Our running backs just don't last that long. In fact, there's actually an interesting stat of guys that kind of held out here that Adam Schefter put out there. He said, here's some notable recent running backs who held out in light of what is now expected with Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs. So these are some running backs that have held out. And I want you guys to think about these running backs. In the first 4 to 5 years of all of these running backs, there are fantastic running backs. Alvin Kamara, Ezekiel Elliott, Melvin Gordon, Le'Veon Bell, Maurice Jones-Drew, Chris Johnson, Steven Jackson, Larry Johnson. All of these guys were fantastic running backs. But from the time these guys held out to what happened the 5 years after, some of these guys didn't even play 5 years after. Like, I don't think Ezekiel Elliott, Zeke has played what? He signed in 2019. His contract went into effect in 2020. He's played 3 years on his contract. I think he had like a 6-year contract or something crazy like that, right? Melvin Gordon held out and Le'Veon Bell held out. We kind of have seen how this goes with some of these running backs. You know, to me, it doesn't make sense to pay running backs, and it never will make sense. And I know it's unfortunate for running backs, right? It is unfortunate. And I think the only way we can really fix this is if I really think the only way to fix the running back situation is to allow running backs to sign like a 3-year contract coming out, because it is unfair that running backs last 4 to 6 years, right? It's just that position that doesn't last a whole long time. Linebackers are kind of the same thing. There's a reason why the best linebackers are now like 2nd and 3rd round guys in the NFL. They're just not getting drafted that high because they don't last that long, right? Because there's only so long that you as a linebacker can take that physicality with offensive linemen, with running backs, hitting guys 100 miles an hour, whatever it is, and how long your body lasts, right? Are you going to last 12 years as a linebacker? You're not, right? You're going to play 5 years at a top tier level. Your 6th comes around, you're already declining. Your coverage ability is going to decline. And that's just the position. That's just the state of certain positions, right? And there's a reason why linebackers aren't getting paid all that highly. Same with running backs. I think it's worse as running backs, but the only way you can fix that is if these guys sign, you know, when they come out, if the NFL allows them to sign 3-year deals, right? Which isn't going to happen. The NFL is not going to do that. But I think that's the only way to kind of fix that. Kevin Lurker said, is there any chance that Josh Jacobs gets signed and moved? I do think that is possible. I do think that, and I've read this. I don't know if this is factual. I should have probably looked into it. Apologies. But I do believe that you can trade Josh Jacobs. And I think the way to do that would be to sign. Well, it'd be first to find a trade partner. If a team agrees, the Raiders would tell Josh Jacobs. If Josh Jacobs agrees, I think Josh would at that point have to sign the tag, and then he'd get moved. And then I think you just have to figure out like the guaranteed money portion of it. If does it go to the new team? Are the Raiders responsible for it? I think at that point you just have to figure those things out. So yeah, I think it is possible for Josh Jacobs to get moved. An interesting comment here. Mustang says Josh Jacobs doesn't want $12 million a year. He wants $17 million a year. He wants too much money, and I do agree with that. I think that is kind of where we're at. I think Josh Jacobs does want more so of that $17 million a year range. I want to show you guys one other thing here. So let me go ahead and switch over here. So Kenny King said the Raiders weren't interested in resetting the running back market, which is understandable. The frustration of Raiders fans is that the Raiders failed to lock up their most valuable first-round pick since 2014, and we all know how that played out. Kenny King makes a good point here, right? Which is that Raider fans are kind of frustrated because we didn't lock up Josh Jacobs, who is arguably the most valuable first-round pick since Khalil Mack. I would argue the only other first-round pick that may be more, I think he is more valuable, would be Colton Miller. Obviously, we locked up Colton Miller. But I understand what Kenny King's saying, and I think this is part of why Raider fans are frustrated, right? You want your players to get paid, right? And I factually agree with that. The Dallas Cowboys do a great job drafting and paying their own players. The Raiders don't do that, right? The Kansas City Chiefs do a great job drafting and paying their own players. The Raiders don't do that. Our draft picks have historically sucked, and Josh Jacobs has been one of the guys who hasn't really sucked, right? And it's just unfortunate that when you have a good player, that he just ended up being a running back, and it's just the one position that you don't want to pay. Um, Raiders Post also put this interesting tweet out. They said the Raiders failed to keep the best defensive end since Howie Long and Khalil Mack, the best quarterback since Rich Gannon and Derek Carr, and the best tight end since Todd Christensen and Darren Waller, and now the best running back since Marcus Allen is a holdout. That's an interesting take, right? Because the Raiders have kind of moved on from some of these guys. So I think it's an interesting take. Obviously, I kind of wanted to just go over some of these takes. Obviously, the Matt Miller take we've already talked about. But yeah, it's just an interesting situation with Josh Jacobs and kind of how it's played out. I do think that Josh Jacobs is likely going to hold that at this point, right? And I don't expect him to play even when week one comes around. I think Josh Jacobs is going to absolutely hold out, and he should do what's best for him. Even when week one comes around, maybe he holds out for a couple of weeks to kind of make his point. It'll let him kind of stay fresh. And then maybe he comes like week 5 or week 6, and then the hope is that he dominates, right? And then the Raiders feel inclined to have to pay him. Now, I do think there's a point where if he misses like the first 6 or 7 games, the Raiders can then re-franchise tag him the following year. So he just has to figure that out. And I think that could be a gamble that Josh Jacobs should possibly take. Obviously, the gamble portion of it would be that if you hold out the first 4 to 5 weeks, well, what if Zamir White's an absolute incredible player, right? What if Zamir White is one of those guys that's a very, very good football player, and he goes for 115 yards in week 1, and week 2 comes around, he's still crushing it, right? So that would be on Josh Jacobs to see if he wants to take that gamble. I don't know if it's a smart thing for him to do, but the alternative is he waits all the way until the Friday before the first game of the season, holds out the entire camp, and then he signs his franchise tag. But if that does happen, could the Raiders also trade him or cut him? I don't know, right? There's just a lot of interesting ways that this can kind of go. We're going to get into the final question here. This one comes from Spacer. He says, in your opinion, what are the odds that Jimmy G is a top 10 quarterback statistically in the 2023-2024 season? It's an interesting question. By statistically, I don't know if you're talking about yards, touchdown to interception ratio, his stats within the pocket, his stats outside the pocket. I think there's a lot of different stats. If you're talking about wins, I think there's definitely a chance that he is a top 10 quarterback in wins. Last year, we won 6 games, and we lost 5 games where we're up at halftime, but we ended up losing. You flip those 5 games. Instead of being 6-11, we would have been 11-6. The Raiders could have been 11-6 last year. Even if you flip, 60 or 70% of those games, we could have won 10 games last year. And I think the Raiders are actually better this year because of multiple reasons. Our O-line is the same O-line, right? They're going to be more consistent. They know how to work with one another. We may upgrade the right guard position. We'll see. I think the quarterback's better for the scheme, and I don't want to get into the Derek Carr rabbit hole, but you guys know how I kind of feel about Carr. I think he held this offense back, especially in the second half of a lot of games that we ended up losing, right? We didn't score. Where we had the ball on the offensive side, we didn't score. Right. So now the hope is that Jimmy Garoppolo doesn't have those issues, but he may have. We'll see if that works out. Our defensive coach is going to be in the second year in his regime. He has his own players. We drafted Tyree Wilson and Byron Young. Right. We drafted these 2 guys. The hope is that as rookies, they have good productive seasons. Right. And they have that type of impact that we've seen certain rookies have in the past. We got a bunch of secondary players this season that I'm excited about. Guys like Duke Shelley, Tyler Hall coming back to the Raiders. I'm excited to see him. Brian Faison comes back among a couple other guys like Marcus Epps. I'm excited to watch all these guys. I think our secondary is going to be better as well. And I think our defense line is going to be much improved this season because we were terrible last year. Let's just be honest, right? Max Crosby gets better. Tyree Wilson comes in and you package him with Chandler Jones. You get some new NASCAR packages. There's just a lot that the Raiders are going to do this year that's going to make them better than last year, right? So statistically, can Jimmy Garoppolo be better? I think it's possible in terms of wins that he's a top 10 quarterback in wins, right? I think it's possible the Raiders win 10 or 11 games this season. I think a lot of it will also depend on Jimmy Garoppolo's health. And even Josh Jacobs, right? He was a big part of our success last year, right? We can't deny that. At the end of the day, paying Josh Jacobs is one conversation, but he was still one of the reasons why we had a lot of success this past season. Omar, thank you for the super chat, said the following. He said, off topic, but the narrative needs to be told. The Raiders didn't want to pay Derek Carr, and that's why he was benched. I wanted us to move on from Derek, but the right way now, our quarterback position up in the air. I agree with you on that. You know, the Raiders may have handled the Derek Carr situation wrong. And I think that was the very first fumble of Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels, their era with the Raiders, right, was benching Derek Carr. They should have let him finish the season, and then they should have looked to trade him after that, right? And who knows? Maybe Derek would have never waived his no trade clause, but we should have at least let Derek Carr finish his career with the Raiders. I understand if the Raiders regime wanted a tank. I think that's a different question. I think there's different ways to do it. Say Derek Carr hurt his shoulder, let him, put him on IR, right? Instead of benching him, publicly benching him. I don't like that, right? I think you can also criticize Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels drafting, right? I think it's been questionable. And I've stated this before. I have a tweet planned out for it coming up here soon, where I'm going to give you guys my guys that I would have drafted, right? I would have taken Jalen Carter over Tyree Wilson. I would have taken Brian Branch over Michael Mayer. And I think we're going to find out in 2 years why Michael Mayer and Tyree Wilson, not saying they're going to be bad players, but why Jalen Carter and Brian Branch are going to be top-tier players. And we're going to find that out within a couple years. And the Raiders are going to once again regret passing on those two guys. Again, not saying it's bad, but there's question marks around Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels, and we can't deny that. These guys got to get it together because they're running the Las Vegas Raiders franchise, right? Yeah, it's going to be interesting, right? Omar, I always appreciate the super chat as always. I appreciate everybody that's tuned in. 36 minutes is not long enough for a live, but because I don't feel well, I'm going to end the live here. But I do want to state just a couple final things. First and foremost, subscribe if you guys are not subscribed. Put the notifications on because when I go live, it's usually like 2 hours before I'll decide to go live. And I am going to start going live way more often, right? The season's approaching. I'll probably go live like on Friday again, upcoming. Not Friday, probably over the weekend. And the way to get those notifications is by turning that on, right? So you guys will know. But more than that, I think people should actually be excited for this season. I know there's there's Twitter accounts, there's Instagram accounts, there's people that are constantly bashing Josh McDaniels and Dave Ziegler. But the facts are this, Josh McDaniels is one of the best offensive play callers in the NFL, right? One of the best offensive coaches in the NFL. He has the success to back it up. I know people say, well, Tom Brady's a go and this and that, and that's true, but you can also get certain quarterbacks that don't have success with certain coaches, right? And then it takes a whole new coach to have success with that quarterback. And I think with Josh McDaniels, he's still a good offensive coach. So I think we got to take a step back and give him, let him do his thing for a year or two. Because what are we going to do? Fire Josh McDaniels and restart with a whole new coach and, wait another 3 years for that coach to suck? Like, it's a cycle. At some point, one of these coaches will hit. It's just a matter of time when. At some point, Dave Ziegler or whoever that general manager is going to hit. It's just a matter of time, right? And we just got to wait it out and hopefully it happens sooner rather than later. I hope you guys enjoy this video, man. Make sure to leave a comment after this video ends. I appreciate you guys as always, and I will see you guys next time with another video.